Hello, I'm Mark, and this is the Fast Track Impact podcast for researchers who want to be more productive and achieve real-world impacts from their research. This week I want to talk about how you can write impact into your next grant proposal to make your grant more competitive. Increasingly, wherever you are in the world, whatever you're applying for, it's more often than not now, impact will be a deciding factor in whether or not you are competitive and you get that funding. So increasingly, I'm getting asked, what can I do? I'm going to draw on my experience as a person who has written a lot of successful grants, but also my experience as a reviewer, as a grant panelist, and my research on impact to tell you what is at the cutting edge of good practice, what are some of the things you can do that will very quickly and easily just up your game, and ultimately how you can make sure that this does not wreck your chances. If you've got a great research idea, you really don't want to go down the tubes just because you didn't pay attention to the impact sections of your proposal. I'm recording this from London, so you may actually be able to hear in the background some fairly dubious music. So we've just been at a grant panel meeting. So I thought, this is kind of fresh in my mind, straight from a panel meeting, having made a bunch of decisions about how to rank proposals. I would share some thoughts with you. So this may or may not be of vital importance depending on what you're applying for. There are still a number of types of funding around the world that do not require you to prove that you'll do any kind of impact whatsoever. So European Research Council, for example, in Europe, Leverhulme in the UK, other schemes elsewhere. So depending on what scheme you're going for, this may or may not be that important. On the other end of the spectrum, there are schemes that very clearly are challenge-led. They have impact front and centre, and it says very clearly in the call criteria that if you haven't got impact, then this isn't going to work. So in the UK, for example, the Global Challenges Research Fund, as an example of one where you're looking at minimum 60-40, but often much closer to 50-50 in terms of the weighting from scientific or research excellence versus impact. And what's interesting for me, though, is the stuff in between and how things are changing in between. And broadly speaking, you can divide these calls up into two. So you've got the responsive mode grants that you can, in the UK at least, put in at any time. There are kind of rolling deadlines on these. And much of that is ring-fenced for the blue skies stuff. Now, we are still required to write a impact summary and a pathway to impact and say what we think might happen, even if that might be very putative, very long-term, very uncertain. We are still asked to do that big thinking, to dream what we think might happen. If you've got some fantastic research that you're proposing and the panel think that it is phenomenal, but you've got a fairly weak impact section, then they will give you a conditional funding acceptance and ask you to go and revise your impact material until you're good enough, and they will only give you the funding once you've revised that to their satisfaction. And so you could argue that, well, hey, I don't need to pay that much attention to this. And you may be right, depending on who is on your panel and how important they think that is, and in particular, how applied your discipline is. I'm going to suggest that even for the most blue skies conservation or nursing research, for example, if you can't prove that it's going to make a difference, then you've probably got a bit of a challenge on your hands in terms of your research excellence as well. What's for me really interesting is the growing number of calls that are what would be called directed calls or challenge-led calls. So these have a particular focus. and they are typically linked to impact in some shape or form. So the one that we were looking at today was linked to the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And in these directed calls, they will not state the proportion of the weighting typically that goes towards impact. So it looks very similar in terms of the criteria you're reading about to a responsive mode one, except that there is also this thing on fit to call. So you have to demonstrate that you meet the aims of the call, and the aims of the call will have impact in them probably somewhere. So yeah, it's there, it's explicit. You do have to do this. What I notice, though, is in calls like this, in these directed calls, you typically don't get great work in terms of the pathways to impact. There is still a real sense that people haven't upped their game. It's still just that kind of night before the final thing, we'll just throw something together in here. And in fact, I haven't even got enough stuff to fill up my 2 pages or however much space you get. What I'm discovering more and more is that actually that is a big deal. So for all of these directed modes, challenge-led funding calls, if you don't do good on impact, then you may well significantly compromise your chances. At minimum, what I've seen is that when you get to the ranking stage, so we've got a whole lot of proposals that are ranked at 7 out of 10, for example. It's a fairly common one. And there's a few out there, outliers at maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 that are definitely going to get funded. And the funding is going to run out somewhere in that rump of projects that have been graded at 7. Now, they've all got the same scores. So now there's a prioritization discussion that happens in terms of which will go to the top of that rump, which will go to the bottom. And very often, in my experience, especially in a directed call, it is that fit to call criteria that helps to sort them out. Well, they were all pretty good in terms of the research. They've all got some flaws or weaknesses. But here's one that, if this does work, that would absolutely deliver the goals of this scheme. And instantly it's put up to the top. And now here's another one that, it was pretty decent research, but there were massive doubts about whether this would ever work in terms of impact. And very often it will be the more applied members of the panel, the non-academic members of the panel, calling for those projects to be put to the bottom of that list. And so if you find yourself in that grey zone, instantly how strong and convincing your impact is how competitive you are and how likely you are to get funding. Now, in the call today, I made a slightly bold move at the end of the meeting because it seemed clear to me that what was going on here was that despite the fact that there were no criteria set in terms of weighting in the call that we were looking at today, it was a very much challenge-led call. And it seemed to me that projects that weren't hitting the right buttons in terms of impact were getting downgraded quite severely. And so I asked people at the end to put their hands up. What weighting do you feel subjectively you were giving to most of these proposals in terms of impact? 0 to 25%. And nobody put their hand up. 25 to 50%. And about half of the panel members put their hands up, the other half abstained. And so unanimous, in terms of those who were willing to answer my question, unanimously, this was anywhere between a quarter and a half of the weighting going to the impact on this. And how much effort did the people put into this? Well, the evidence I could see in this particular call was nowhere near 50%. In most cases, probably nowhere near even 25% of effort put into that. And that requires something that is going to be mainstream through your proposal, not just the impact sections, that it clearly adds up to something that is going to make a difference. It's going to be credibly impactful. So this stuff really matters. 3 things I'm going to suggest. and these are kind of the high level things, and I'm going to try and make these generic across whatever funder you're applying to, wherever you are in the world. I'll just thread through, because I think the majority of people listening to this are UK based. I'll thread through a few UK references, but I'll try not do that too much. And then I'm going to give you the 7 things that I see most commonly in good proposals. So some kind of smaller but highly powerful tips as well. And if you want to see these in practice, you can head over to my best practice library on my website. So easiest way to find that is just fasttrackimpact.com/resources. I'm going to go to that now because I can't remember where it is on the page. And you can see all of my guides specified to the research councils, or UKRI as it's known in the UK now, Horizon 2020, etc. They're all on this page as well. And you'll see in the 3rd, 4th section down, be inspired with these examples of good practice. That's what I've called the heading. And you can then see my good practice library there. Lots of different examples of proposals that have pathways to impact that I think are good for some reason. Some of them are mine, some of them are for other people across lots of different disciplines. And of course, none of them are perfect. So I've put my own evaluation of them that pulls out the good practice features. So you can see why I think it's good practice and be inspired by those aspects, and hopefully not replicate too many of the mistakes, because they all do have mistakes in them, including my own ones, I will admit. And for me, this is about spreading innovation. So if you've got good ideas, if you've got great examples, please do let me know. I will evaluate them. If I agree, then I would love to share them with others and continue to drive good practice. So 3 key things that you need to do. The first 2 things in the UK system would be things that you would put into your impact summary, and the 3rd thing would be going into your pathway to impact. But you will thread these through the different sections of your proposal, wherever it is that you're applying. So the first thing is that you need to actually have some really specific impact goals. And this is not vague. I'm going to change the world. We're going to change government policy. We're going to meet all of the sustainable development goals, that kind of stuff. This is something which is highly credible and specific. So we're going to zoom in on this particular sustainable development goal, and we're going to zoom in on these 2 targets. And actually, we're going to, in this particular country, we're going to work with the government towards these 2 targets in these specific ways, with this part of the government in this initiative or under this strategy, or working towards a particular policy or mechanism that might actually genuinely move the needle on this particular issue. So we've got a specific impact goal. I'm looking usually, well, you will at least one. I would normally go with somewhere between 3 and 5 impact goals. So there's a sense that, we've got something very clear here. Go back to the first episode of my podcast this season if you want to hear my typology, or just there's an article called "What is Impact" on my website. I think linked from resources as well, and you can see my typology. For me, I find this quite a useful way of identifying impact goals, because I think very often we're really tied up with just those long-term, really exciting, powerful, end-of-pipe solution type things, which is great. But we then overlook the fact that there are potentially some very persuasive and entirely legitimate impact goals much closer to home. And for me, there's a real benefit here, because you get to appeal to both sides of the funding panel or the review college. So there will be the reviewers and the panelists who I would characterize as bored. So the people who are just saying, come on, everything that I'm reviewing today is really not making a big difference. It's fairly standard. I want something exciting, something daring, something that's high risk, high reward. And by having some of those end of pipe, big, long-term things and really thinking as far down that line, well, what would happen next? And then what? And what if that person took it off? And then what if it went there? And just tracing this all the way to a putative end point that is really impressive. Now I've got those people excited. Well, okay, maybe this isn't that likely. Maybe there are reasons why this might go horribly wrong. But you know what? They've traced out that pathway. It is possible. It's credible, even if not likely. And if this were to happen, then, hey, this would change the world. And I'm willing to back this. Now you've got a panelist who is saying, you know what? This one needs to go to the top of that run. This is one that I think should get scored higher than everyone else who is arguing this, because this actually really excites me, and this is why. Great, you've got that person on board. The problem is you've also got the more risk-averse panelists and reviewers who are saying, well, yeah, but what if that happens? And this could go wrong, and they've made all these different assumptions, and I don't believe that this would ever happen. I feel quite nervous about this, because if it's all hanging on all of these assumptions beyond the lifetime of this project, then we may have nothing to show for this in terms of impact. And so by using my typology, you are now able to sort through and think about a range of closer, nearer impacts, which are still legitimate and are typically going to happen within the lifetime of your project. So they are now highly credible, highly likely, and they're not as impressive, but for those risk-averse people, yeah, that could happen, and I believe that is actually going to happen. So, for example, capacity building impacts, awareness raising, and understanding impacts. We've changed how people think about this issue, and this is why it's really important that people think differently. This is why it was a problem that they thought how they did or how they do now, and this is how we're going to change this. Perhaps shifting that into attitudinal change, behavior change, things like that. What are these things that you can do? A change in professional practice, for example. We don't actually have it threaded through all the way to changing people's lives, changing customers, patients, or whatever it is, but we've changed professional practice. We've changed organizational culture, although we haven't got the bottom line yet in terms of profits or saving money. Those kinds of interim impacts you spot when you start looking through the eyes of my typology, and you think, yeah, we can do that and that and that. Great, now I've got some impact goals. I've got the lower risk, highly likely things within the lifetime of my project. I've got the more exciting, ambitious things that are going to hopefully get people batting for me on the panel. And I've written them in a way which is highly specific. So I'm not making them too generalizable. I am putting a location on them if need be in this country or at the regional scale. And if this is international, I'm specifying international policy within a particular framework or international policy process or UN process, for example. There may be some kind of measurable element to it. So we're going to increase it by this amount or by this date, something along those sorts of lines. And to make sure this is specific and measurable, I would ask yourself the question, well, how will you know if you've achieved that goal? What would you monitor? What would you evaluate? Whether qualitatively or quantitatively, what would be the things that you would measure, count, the kind of things you would expect people to stand in front of you and say, if this has actually worked, yeah, that has meaning for me, that has value, that's changed my life. And the more specific you can be as you envisage what this might actually look like, the more specific you're able to make your impact goals. For me, a take-home message from this podcast episode is going to be a three-word take-home message, which is specificity equals credibility. And that, for me, starts with your impact goals. Instantly, you've got really specific impact goals. You've got credible impact goals. If you've got credible impact goals, then great. I want to know what happens next, who's going to benefit, and what happens after that, which is, well, what is your pathway? What are the activities, engagement methods, or whatever that you're going to use to enable those people to benefit in these ways? But instantly, I've got something that's impressing me. It's specific and therefore it's credible. Some of the calls that you may be applying to will already have expected impacts that they want you to apply for. So this can be very prescriptive. So in Horizon 2020, for example, there will be very specific things that you have to explain exactly how you're going to achieve those societal impacts or benefits. And great, tick those boxes. But that doesn't mean that is all you can do. You can go beyond, above. You can go deeper. You can be more diverse. You can be richer. And I think for me that's really empowering, because I think that when you have very prescriptive goals, it can be quite instrumental. It can be quite narrowing. You can feel like you've been put in a straitjacket. And for me, to be competitive, I'm going to have to do all of those things really well. But I can become even more competitive when I then go beyond and I go deeper. And those people on the panel who also feel a little bit critical of the way that the call has been framed and how narrow or instrumental it is, you're instantly winning brownie points with them, and you're going above and beyond. Now, of course, you need to not go too far above and beyond in terms of value for money and losing focus. But certainly don't allow yourself to be constrained if you feel constrained by what a call is telling you have to do. So that's my first of three things you need to get right. Specific impact goals that you can monitor and evaluate. Number two is that you need to have well-targeted stakeholders and or publics. In many funding calls, they will be termed beneficiaries, the people who will benefit. Now, for me, the word beneficiaries is actually quite useful, because if you listen to the first episode of this season, you'll hear the definition that I've built into the second edition of the Research Impact Handbook of impact simply as benefit. And for me, the really empowering question that I then ask is, who benefits? And for me, there's two sides to this. So in our funding applications, we are expected to tell the funders who will benefit from this. They're asking for our beneficiaries, great. But when we ask that question, what instantly comes to mind, hopefully, is the fact that, these guys might benefit in this time, in this culture, in this place, in these ways. But actually, there are a bunch of guys over here who may well feel this very differently and perceive it differently, and for whom this may be the opposite of a benefit. And it's really important that we identify that. Now, we're maybe not going to sell that as an impact goal if this is a negative, but if you have an impact goal that you realise now is hugely contestable, then instantly you know that you've got a critique you need to head off. And I'm either sidestepping that issue altogether and refocusing my proposal and not going into that really hotly contested, controversial area where I'm going to get tied up in knots. Or I'm doing my homework on this and I'm working out, right, well, how could we do this in a way that gets as many benefits for as many people as possible? And can we understand who these people are who we think may be disadvantaged, and why? Can we work with them to find out if there are ways in which we could ameliorate the worst negative impacts of this on them? And then that means that later on in the proposal, whether this is my case for support for something which is very much co-produced and integrated throughout, or my pathway to impact, or wherever it is, I'm able to head off those criticisms and do something a bit more sophisticated that says, okay, we're aware that we're making some assumptions here. We're aware that these groups might have these issues, and this is what we're going to do to deal with that. So you're not attacked by reviewers and panelists for what you're planning, and you're not too naive. So that's the first key point here is we are identifying beneficiaries, and we identify the flip side, and we head that off. We deal with that. We don't just hide it or brush it onto the carpet and hope no one notices and nothing bad happens. The first challenge that I think many of us will have is that we have fairly blinkered views of this when we just kind of go in with a blank sheet of paper. If I give you a blank sheet of paper and say, right, tell me who will benefit from your research, 2 or 3 organizations, groups of people might instantly come to mind. And there will be 2 or 3 organizations or groups of people who you would never say up front. But when I probe, when we think about this, when you talk to your colleagues, when you talk to other people, you think, oh yeah, they're actually really important. And you know what? It's not just me who always forgets those guys. It's the rest of the world constantly forget these people. These are the marginalized. These are the voiceless. And you know what? I don't want to fall into that trap. So my message here is be systematic. And that doesn't mean that you therefore have to identify and represent everyone who might have a stake. If you are diligent, then you may come up with lists of hundreds of organizations. This is possible. But what we're doing here is we are being systematic. So yeah, I'm spending as much time as I've got on this. And for me, often this is just an hour of my time. And I'm doing a stakeholder or publics analysis. So this is in my book. There's a free template on the resources page of my website. Download my template, fill it in. And essentially, a good stakeholder or publics analysis is simply asking 3 questions. So who are people who might be interested in my research? And I'm looking at the intersection between their interests and my interests. So they will have many interests, and there are lots of things I could legitimately do to help them that would be impact. That just wouldn't be research impact unless they are linked to my research. So who are these people who I think are interested in specific parts of my research? And then the second 2 questions are how much benefit do I think they will get, and in what ways? And what level of influence do I think they might have on my ability to achieve benefits for them or for other people through the research? And that influence can be one of 2 ways. It can be the power to facilitate, enable me to achieve impact, because actually they have very similar impact goals to me. My impact is their impact is my impact. And if I connect with them early enough in the process, then they will potentially throw staff time, resources, money, data, access to people, to field sites. Great. But bear in mind that some of these very influential organizations or perhaps individuals may be influential because they may have the power to block you from achieving impact. In some cases, they'll have the power to block you from even doing your research. So I do a lot of research with people who do genetic modification of crops, and there are people who are ideologically opposed to that, who will destroy their experiments, let alone try and oppose them from commercializing the products or getting them into the market, or getting anyone to adopt those products in the marketplace. So you need to know who these people are, whether they will facilitate your impact or if you think they're going to block you, because the sooner you know about that, the sooner you can do something to work around that, bring them on side, and if possible, you're working with these people before you've even applied for the funding to reduce the risk that this all goes horribly wrong. So we're being systematic about who these beneficiaries might be, whether they're beneficiaries or the opposite of that, by doing a stakeholder or publics analysis, finding out who is interested, who will benefit, and who has influence. Now, I may come up with a big long list, so I'm going to prioritize. I'm asking myself now, right, who are the people who are most interested, who will get most benefit, who will have most influence? Are there moral imperatives here that will actually enable me to bring in people who are going to have a high benefit, but who may not be that interested, or who are hugely influential, but again, not interested, and they would like to block it because it's going to really compromise their interests, and I need to bring them in. What about those who are really not influential, who are the marginalized, the voiceless? Maybe I want to bring them in for other moral, ethical reasons. There's no one right way of ranking and ordering these, but it enables you to systematically decide this is why and now this is how I'm going to prioritize and rank the organizations I want to reach out to. I can now maybe categorizing them into public versus private, or whatever other way I want to do this. No right way of doing that. And now I've got a list of types of beneficiaries that I can write into my proposal. In the UK setting, that would be in my impact summary, which the impact summary just has your goals and your beneficiaries. Simple as that. So I've got these, 5 different groups of stakeholders or publics that I think will be relevant. And I've got specific examples of organisations within those publics or stakeholders. Do note, I just used the word publics, plural. I didn't do that on by mistake. I don't believe there is any such thing as the general public. What we're looking at here is different publics who will vary in their level and type of interest in your research, who will get different benefits. Who may or may not be able to influence others taking this up, this going places. So we're trying to understand who those different publics are. And even if this is school children, I'm asking myself, well, okay, is this in England versus Scotland? And now I've got different curricula, and which part of the curriculum does this apply to? Which age of school children might I be trying to reach out to, depending on where there is the biggest attainment gap, or where I might be able to influence people to choose a particular subject? And I've got it narrowed down to, okay, publics has turned into children, has turned into school children, has turned into year 7 primary children studying environmental issues as part of the Scottish Curriculum for Excellence. Great. So we're being specific. And again, as I said earlier on, specificity equals credibility. This is not now we're going to work with the government. We've now got it is the UK government versus another government. This is now a specific government department. This is a particular team within that government department, and here is the name of the team leader who we have approached for to join our stakeholder advisory panel. Whether or not they've accepted, I've got that name of that person, and later on in the pathway to impact, here are some specific strategies that they have worked on that are in the pipeline that we're going to contribute towards. Way more credible than we're going to work with the government. And instantly, government, I'm asking questions. Do these people actually know which part of government? Do they actually know what policy agenda? Do they have any idea really in terms of specific goals here? Or is this just pie in the sky? And are they starting from scratch? In which case, I'm not sure I believe that this is that credible. So let me have a think. Anything else that you need to know about here in terms of targeting stakeholders, publics, beneficiaries? Yeah, I think a final point here is just the order of this. Now, in an ideal world, and I'll give you my unideal world as well, because let's just be real here. In an ideal world, you've got time, and you're doing this ahead of time, and now based on this stakeholder analysis or publics analysis, you're going out and you're talking to these people. I'm writing an email to these people, and I'm saying, I'd like to meet up with you. I'm not just out of the blue asking for a letter of support. I'm asking for a meeting, whether it's a phone conversation or whatever else. I want to find out more about your interests in this particular area. I get a response to that email, and I get that telephone conversation, because it's not just a broadcast email saying, this is us, this is our research, and we want to find out how we can help you, or we want you to use our results. I'm saying to one organisation, I understand that you're interested in these issues based on your latest strategic plan. We are planning some research that intersects with 2 of these issues, and we would like to have a conversation with you about how we might be able to work together on this particular agenda. And to the next organisation, I'm not going to be manipulative or disingenuous with this. I'm going to say, well, look, we are working on these issues, but I'm prioritising the fact, number 1 in this email, we're working on this other issue here, which I know is top of your agenda based on what I've understood from my colleagues about what you're working on at the moment. And so yeah, great, you get that response, and you have a differently focused conversation with each of these people. If at this point you're doing it early enough, you discover, actually, I'm drawing a blank here. This is still pretty vague. I'm not very sure about this. Then the first step for me is to now go to your colleagues, go to find someone who is more engaged, who's got more experience working in that sector, who does more engaged research, more applied research than you, and get them to help you. Even turn it into a little workshop. I quite often do this with one or two cross-cutting stakeholders who I've got a bit of social capital with, a couple of hours, putting stuff up on walls and doing this with them. Instantly those gaps are filled in, and okay, I do know now what these people are interested in based on that intelligence, and I can write those emails, I can tailor those phone calls, I get responses, I get buy-in, I then get that letter of support, I get a project partner, I get someone who feels like, yeah, this was respectful, this is something that I've been able to shape, I've been able to input to, and you get the help you need and a level of specificity in your research proposal that then really works. So for me, early is great because you actually have the chance to, in some way, co-produce your proposal. They get the chance to shape what you're doing, help you to do things that are going to be highly relevant. And it's not just a case of, well, here's the research, and now we're going to disseminate it, and we're going to hope that it's relevant to these people, but we didn't ask them what they really wanted to start with. Now, this is controversial. I had a minor falling out with one of my funders recently, who refused to sign my collaboration agreement to give me the funding until I could assure them that none of the stakeholders who were on my advisory board had in any way shaped or influenced my proposal. To which I said, well, I can't sign the agreement because they did help me shape this, because this is good practice. If you want to ask people to submit engaged, impactful research, then good practice is you talk to the people who might have some needs to start with, you find out what those needs are, and then you design research that might actually intersect with some of those needs. And yes, it is still independent, cutting edge research. And if they don't like the results, then we're not going to change them. But at least I started this by understanding where people were coming from, what their needs were, what their cultural sensitivities were, all of that stuff. And I go in with an understanding of that context rather than doing this entirely in my ivory tower and hoping for the best. And I think that research funders are increasingly recognizing that is what they are telling us is good practice, and therefore they need to change how they do their contracts. And they did sign my contract in the end after my argument. So good practice, they get to shape it, and we actually come up with a much more convincing proposal where this is threaded through and shapes and flavours the whole thing. And that really does shine through. You can see the proposals at panel in these meetings that have talked the talk of co-production and participation and engagement, but in reality, I haven't done that. And there's these little giveaway words like we're going to disseminate, we're going to educate, and you think, yeah, there's a worldview underneath all of this stuff that says something different. Now I said I'd give you my worst case scenario, which is, well, hey, this is a bit of a rush. The opportunity came up. I found out about it late. I'm dashing to my deadline, and hopefully it's not the night before because you really are limited. But we've got weeks rather than months now to pull this thing together. I would still argue that doing a stakeholder or publics analysis is going to make a massive difference to you. An hour of your time, just yourself with your team, thinking systematically through this, and you've now got a really credible and specific list of beneficiaries you can build into your proposal. You've got a sense of what those benefits might be, and if benefits are impacts, then you've instantly got something which is much more likely to be challenge-led, demand-led in terms of impact goals that people would actually like to see. So you transform the benefits and the interests that you get through that analysis into impact goals, and you still do a lot better a job. And I'm still writing to some of these people. Maybe I don't get replies, but I can still say I've at least invited these people to join my advisory board, and I've got that specific detail in there. So that's the first two things. I've got specific impact goals. I've got a really well-targeted set of stakeholders, publics, beneficiaries. I've been a bit more sophisticated than just beneficiaries. I've looked at my assumptions. I've identified those who might come off not so well and how I'm going to deal with that. The third and final element now is that I need to have a credible plan for impact. Now, depending on your funder, this could be a communications plan, it could be a dissemination plan. I really don't like that term, but you may have to use those words. It could be an impact plan, it could be a pathway to impact. In the UK setting, what we've got is typically two sections, an impact summary, which is what are my impact goals and who are the beneficiaries, and then my pathway to impact. However this is done, there are these three elements, and your task is to make sure that all three of these things coherently map onto each other. So I've got a set of impact goals, and I'm asking myself now, who are the different groups who will benefit from each of those impact goals? And as I run through those impact goals, is there an impact goal that doesn't have anyone who will benefit from it? Okay, I've got a missing beneficiary group who might benefit from that goal. Okay, I add them in. I'm running through my list of beneficiaries or stakeholders, and I'm asking, so how do each of these different groups benefit? And I'm asking myself, have I got an impact goal that speaks to each one of these groups' interests? And I go through, and it turns out that, well, actually, farmers are one of the key beneficiary groups, and there is no impact goal that has any relevance or benefit to farmers. It's all targeted at policymakers. I need to add another impact goal. Great. So I've got a list of impact goals and beneficiaries that tie up and map onto each other, and it's coherent. Now I need to make sure I've got a list of activities, specific plans, pathways, things that I'm going to do that will enable me to achieve each and every single one of those impact goals for each and every one of those beneficiaries. Sounds simple, but man, it's so infrequent that I actually see this working coherently. And so you just systematically work through. So for impact goal number one, how would I credibly achieve that? What ideas have I got? Brainstorm. Okay, here's a list of things I could do to achieve the first one. Second one, third one, great. And now I'm going through my beneficiary groups. So here I've got a whole series of activities for my first impact goal. This first impact goal, I think, is something which is all about policy. So for policymakers, now what different types of policymakers have I got? So I've got the UN people, I've got national people, I've got politicians, I've got civil servants, I've got evidence people, I've got policy people. Okay, so have I actually got a pathway, an activity, the right kind of seminar, policy brief, activity, whatever it is that is going to appeal to each of those different relevant groups that I've identified? Great, take them all off. If not, I need to find a new activity so that I made sure that I actually did that. And I'm running through each of those beneficiary groups, and I'm realizing, I've got a problem. None of these are specifically targeted towards farmers. How do I solve that problem? And, actually, my farmers don't speak English. So instantly, I've got an issue in terms of the fact that all of my activities require English language skills. And in fact, maybe they even require literacy. Maybe they're not literate in all cases. I make no assumptions about farmers. I've met many people who you would very much expect to be literate, who are not literate. Never make assumptions. I can tell you from bitter experience in terms of literacy, wherever you're working in the world, including in the richest countries of the world. So I'm systematically checking there are pathways that work with all of the relevant beneficiary groups and that will take me to each of the different impacts. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to be a little bit more specific and sophisticated than just I've got one activity I do that takes me to that impact. very often what we will discover is that you have a series of impacts which thread one to the next. And so we have these causal chains or pathways that run from an early interim impact, I change how people think, to a secondary impact, well, we change attitudes or behaviours, to a tertiary impact, well, actually those behaviours on the ground saved lives, saved money, saved habitats, whatever it was. And so I need to make sure that I've got a series of activities that work across that causal chain. And in some cases, actually, just to get to one of those impacts, there's a whole series of different activities I'm going to have to do. So to get a policy impact, I'm going to start by doing a policy analysis. Then I'm going to move to doing a systematic review of the evidence. I'm going to turn that now into a policy brief. I'm going to take that policy brief to a policy seminar. I'm then going to have a series of meetings with various high-level people. I'm then going to go to a high level of policymaker. I'm going to go to the UN or whatever it is. And you've got this series of activities that you do that thread together that ultimately take you to, yeah, that looks like I'm going to get that impact. Way more credible than just, yeah, I'll write a policy brief. So you've got now a credible pathway to impact that has a series of activities. And we've been systematic about making this now really coherent in terms of delivering specific impact goals for specific groups of people. And of course, actually, just bear in mind, these could be non-human beneficiaries. This could be future generations. Let's be sophisticated about this. What other things might you see in a pathway to impact? Well, that's your kind of basic stuff. If you want to be highly competitive, there's a bunch of additional things that you can add in here. Now, you may run out of room, and depending on how applied your proposal is, you may be able to thread this into your case for support. One sneaky trick I see people use a lot is we're going to have a management work package which will do management and impact, or we're going to have an impact work package all by itself. It could be an exploitation or commercialization work package, whatever it is, and I'm going to put all of my commercialization and stuff into that work package now to free up room for the broader, deeper, wider, more diverse impacts in my pathway to impact and impact summary, and I'll cross-reference back to that work package so it all adds up and I get a bit more space. In some proposals you'll get extra pages, extra sections, so official development assistance, a one-pager on that. I might get a one-pager to submit a theory of change or a logical framework analysis, depending on who I'm applying to. So it's fairly flexible. I'm being fairly... what's the word for it? I'm being flexible myself in terms of how I use the different sections to fit in as much as I can. And this is a bit of a clue. If I'm struggling for space, this is a good sign. If I've got a page and I've got a blank page and I'm looking for 2 pages of text and I'm struggling to get more than 1 page, that is a sign that I've got a really weak impact section. You should have way more than you need, and it should be a real struggle to fit this stuff in. That's a sign that you're heading at the right level. So some of the things that you might want to add in here, first of all, is going to be a monitoring and evaluation strategy. Very often in the development world now, this is monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. MEAL is the acronym that people are using at the moment. But what the A and the L do there is they just kind of add in the idea that you know what, I'm putting some things out here and I am saying I'm going to be accountable for this. We are going to measure this stuff. We're going to report on this stuff. You can hold us to account on this. And moreover, we're going to learn from this because we don't expect it all to go swimmingly well. It's going to go wrong. And we have mechanisms built in here so we get the feedback sooner rather than later. We can course correct, we can do things better. So we've got those formative opportunities to learn from our evaluations, from our monitoring as we go. For me, what this does that makes you really competitive is that it gives you an added layer of specificity. So I may now identify some specific indicators. Here are a number of things that we would expect to see happen, or that we would be able to measure, or trends that we would see before and after, based on a baseline that we're going to collect at the beginning of the project. But there's a level of specificity now that we've broken that impact goal into, say, 3 indicators that we would expect to see. I would always describe these as indicative. These are indicators, so they'll never tell you the whole truth. If I come up with better ideas during the project and I'm going to change this, I also don't want to be criticised by the reviewers for forgetting something obvious that they saw. So they're indicative indicators, things I think I would probably measure. And now this is the methodology. This is how I'm going to collect that data. Do I need a baseline? Do I need a randomised control trial, or could I do an audit, for example, if I'm in the healthcare kind of arena? And then how will I write that up? Will I be publishing that in the peer-reviewed literature? Will this be something that we will publish on our project blog? Is this something that will go into a report by one of our project partners who is working with us on this stuff? So we've got indicators, we've got methods behind this, and as part of that monitoring and evaluation strategy, I'm also going to talk about my assumptions. So I'm now making explicit the fact that I'm assuming that a bunch of things are going to fall into place, but I recognise that these things might go wrong, that I might have got this wrong, that things might actually lead to X, Y, and Z negative unintended consequences, and now this is how I'm going to mitigate those risks. And for me, at the cutting edge of this is recognizing those assumptions and risks, and not leaving them to your reviewers and panelists to identify and criticize you for, but to say, yeah, I understand this context well enough that I know that this could go wrong, and this is why this is so risky, but this is why you shouldn't worry too much, and this is how I'm going to mitigate this. And instantly you get brownie points from knowing and fessing up to that, but also from explaining why that's not too much of a concern, and you don't get downgraded for being high risk. Hopefully, that's the plan anyway. Linked to that, I'm going to have some funding put aside to this, so I'm going to explain how we're going to do this. So for a large project, you may decide to get a consultant in to do this. I personally tend not to do that. It helps that I've got a bit of expertise myself, so I can say that I'll do it, or I'll mentor a postdoc to do the majority of that work myself. I would argue, though, whether or not you have a kind of an expertise written down in terms of publications like I might have in monitoring and evaluation. We all have expertise as researchers, and for me that is the expertise you need to design an evaluation. Ask yourself the research question, what is my impact? And you can design an evaluation. That means you can credibly design and lead on this yourself. And for me, the advantage of that is that you understand your context deeply. You are involved in that. You're collecting that data as you go. You're getting those opportunities for learning on the job as things happen, as things go wrong, and you're able to adapt much more effectively. So for me, this is much better, and it's also cheaper. You just need a bit of guts to say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it properly. And I'm putting some postdoc resource to this. We're going to have a bit of consultancy help to do some marketing kind of comms, designy type stuff, or our website or whatever it is. I'm putting money to that as well. I like to actually conceptualize that as a percentage. So in the UK system, the only percentage I've ever seen research councils give when they've put out directed calls is 10%. Interestingly, when you talk to the research councils, they get anywhere between 2 and 4% typically coming back. And what's happening there, I think, is researchers saying, well, yeah, that's what you're saying as the funder, but I've got to run the gauntlet of the peer review college first, and they may not be where you're at with impact. So let's not risk this coming out as bad value for money. And so for me, where I pitch this is generally somewhere between 5 and 10%. And what I'm arguing here is, guys, I'm taking this seriously. This is the amount of funding I'm putting aside. It's this number of days of postdoc time. It's this percentage of my role as project manager or principal investigator. It's these consumable costs, travel costs, workshop costs, printing costs, website costs, etc. Adding them all up, this is the percentage. I'm taking this seriously. Other things that you can add in here, I think we would all integrate our academic track record into our proposal. Trust us, we're amazing, and it does help. Of course, depending on the kind of proposal you're doing, it's more or less important. So if this is an early career targeted thing, it's a first grant type thing, yeah, maybe it's less important. Fellowship application, for example. But whether or not it matters in terms of your academic track record, I would argue that it really does matter in terms of impact, that you have credibility in this arena. And for me, if this is a big project, if you don't think you've got that credibility in terms of, I've never worked in this country before, I've never engaged with these types of hard to reach groups before, in these really contested issues before, instantly you may be perceived as not being a safe pair of hands. So for me, I would then be approaching someone who would be considered a safe pair of hands and inviting them on as a collaborator to help me do better impact and be credible in terms of my track record. And then whatever I've got to show for this, I am putting that into the proposal and saying, well, look, here is our track record in terms of impact. We can't prove to you that we are going to go out and do this stuff and make it work. But what we can prove is we've done this before in similarly challenging contexts in this country with these groups on these contested issues before, and we have achieved impacts before. So trust us, we can do this again. And that can be fairly persuasive. Final couple of words on this. Most of the things that I review in this space, they're massively dense. So this is a good sign. You're really trying to pack it in. You've got more material than you want. But the amount of time that people have to go through these can be surprisingly short. So in the panel today, we were on average 10 minutes per proposal for all of the discussions. That's a discussion. What's happened before that is that we've got a number of peer reviews, so anywhere between 3 and 5 peer reviewers who've looked at this in lots more depth. And then we'll have an introducer and a second introducer who will have read it in depth again. And we'll be talking to it in panel. There'll be 2 people who will have read it in not much depth, but they'll be vaguely familiar with it, and then a discussion. The rest of the panel, they're looking at it typically in that 10 minutes, checking bits that are relevant to their expertise. What I'm doing is I'm going to the pathway to impact, and I'm looking, is that credible? Or I'm going to the specific methodology that I'm familiar with, or discipline. And if you can't find the relevant part and you can't read that quickly, then you're instantly at a disadvantage. I suspect, looking at the number of words and the misunderstandings that I see again and again in peer review feedback, that a lot of these peer reviewers are doing this on the deadline day in significantly under an hour. And they are speed reading these things. So do yourself a favor, break up that text, put in some subheadings, at least make bold the key points, put in some bullet point lists, things like that. Let's not waste space with lots of tables and things like that, but let's think about how we can still break this up and help people signpost and navigate that text. One thing people often do is add diagrams, and for me, your diagram needs to save you words and communicate something much more space efficiently. I think a diagram is problematic when it's half a page out of 2 pages and you're repeating all that stuff in the text. It needs to explain something that's hard to explain in the text and that is going to save you space. And that's why something like a theory of change for me often isn't that helpful, unless you've been given that extra time time and space to do that, and that's an expectation on you. Great, use it as a planning tool to get your thinking straight and to get those causal chains painted out in your imagination. So this is credible, but 1 out of 2 pages to a pathway to impact, you're not going to have space to do that justice, and you're going to end up explaining and repeating stuff and kind of coasting along the surface of things. So I'm going to conclude with a few additional tips that I think can help. The first of these is that you need to demonstrate that there is a real demand for or interest in your work. So come up with some kind of evidence-based problem statement that describes the number of people who are affected by this particular issue, or how important it is in some shape or form. And then you can set your impact goals in relation to that. We're going to address the whole of this issue, part of this issue, for this population in this location. And you're able then to talk in much more persuasive terms about the nature of the challenge you're going to help address, and so give more power to your impact in the way that you frame it. The next thing that I'm going to suggest is that you need to keep things really simple in terms of your language. There will be people who will pay particular attention to the impact parts of your proposal. If there is a non-academic member of a funding panel, this may be the only thing that they've read in terms of all of the proposals. So I try and make it stand alone, that you can read these and they make sense without having to have read the full proposal. Now, obviously, that can get a bit repetitive, so only to an extent. But if you've got loads and loads of jargon and acronyms and it's really dense and full of academic language, that's going to potentially be a barrier to, in particular, those members of the panel understanding. But I would argue also people outside your discipline who don't work with those organizations, who don't know what those acronyms mean. You want this to really communicate to the members of the panel, to your reviewers. So keeping your language simple is really important, and I would argue especially so for these parts, given the people who are most likely to have read this part of your proposal. One other tip is to get some specialist impact pre-review. So we probably all know that when you pre-review a proposal, you significantly increase your chances of success. I identify the problems ahead of time, I fix them before it goes into review, so I'm much less likely to get tripped up by those issues. If this is a very much applied piece of research, if you're going to a call which is directed, that is impact focused, then actually getting someone outside academia to review your proposal, and if nothing else to pay attention to the impact parts of your proposal, can give you a real competitive edge. Now, finding these people is fairly challenging in terms of finding someone who is willing to give up that time to help you with this. So you're going to have to potentially draw on some social capital. You may need to book that time in advance with them so that they're ready and primed and waiting for you to send this to them, so that it's not last minute and you do get someone to help. My final point then is coming back to what I said right at the beginning, my take-home message from this episode, which is that specificity equals credibility. I told you it was a 3-word take-home message at the beginning, didn't I? And those are those 3 words. If you are specific, then you are credible. So look at your impact goals, look at your beneficiary groups and the examples of the organizations you're planning to work with. Look at the activities and the pathways that you've designed. How can you make them more and more specific and really paint them out in enough detail that they are actually believable? Because that is what's going to make the difference between this actually singing and communicating and convincing reviewers and panelists versus it falling flat and just not being believable. In this episode, I've tried to give you a whole range of different things that you can do based on my research, on my experience as a reviewer, on my experience as a panelist. And it is really quite surprising. As you sit through these meetings, you see the same mistakes being made again and again and again. And it can feel quite obvious. It can feel quite easy. Well, why don't you just do these things? But actually, you know what? The people who are sitting on these panels, who are sitting there thinking, you know what, this is so obvious, it's so easy, why don't people do these things that we know will work? we don't hear this stuff, we don't get told this stuff. And so my hope is that by sharing some of these insights with you, that you get the opportunity to learn from that experience and to not make some of those mistakes and to put something together that really does actually communicate and get you the funding that you need, so that ultimately, this is what it's all about, you get funding to do impactful research that then actually does make a difference, that actually works.